And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about LiveRamp Safe Haven and how we use CDAP. And so I'm calling this collaborating on the data science value chain. It's a mouthful, but we'll break it down and talk a little bit about how we use CDAP today. So quickly, like what I'll cover today is, I'll actually start all the way back at the customer problem that we faced in LiveRamp Safe Haven and how it took us, how we ended up discovering CDAP as one of the solutions. I'll also talk a little bit about our whole data operations concept and a way that it's been for us to power collaborative data science and how CDAP actually plays the technical role in fulfilling that. And then finally, at the end, I'll actually get into some of the technical details and talk about two parts of the CDAP stack where we've been able to leverage the stack, the extensibility, and use that to map some of our own LiveRamp kind of domain or business concepts and drive some real value for our teams. So before I jump in, I think that it's really important with these kind of things to start at the customer problem. So when we think about LiveRamp Safe Haven, the key customer problem that we're dealing with is that today in the ecosystem of enterprise organizations, we have both data-rich and data-poor companies. And what I mean by that is when you, as a consumer today, interact with, say, a retailer, you actually, and you make a purchase, you actually are interacting with tons of different organizations through that journey. Right. So if you go into a store and you buy, say your favorite bag of crisps, you actually are interacting with the retailer as well as the brand and possibly many other points along that chain. And so for a company to be truly data rich with respect to their customer data, they actually need to really understand the customer journey all the way, all those touch points that you go through as a consumer and be able to both measure them and do that in a compliant way. And so that kind of brings us to the core customer problem within LiveRamp Safe Haven. And so I like to put up this diagram, which shows, which tries to bring that together and says that from one of our clients' perspective, so from an enterprise perspective, you have data sitting in all kinds of silos. And these silos are the places that as a customer, your data is probably locked up, and to create, for a marketer and a client ecosystem to create a true customer journey, it's quite challenging actually, because you have things like point of sale data in one location, you have things like loyalty program data, you have traditional CRM. And so this ecosystem is massive, it's extremely siloed. And as Chai actually mentioned more broadly, when we think about enterprise data integration, there's hundreds and hundreds of sources that data can come from. And this is very much applicable in our domain as well. And so that's where LiveRamp Safe Haven comes in, right? To be able to actually, how do you actually solve this problem? One of the key ways that LiveRamp tries to help our customers solve this problem is ensure that there's a way to actually compliantly exchange data, do it based on permissions, and essentially make data-poor companies more data-rich. And once you do that, you can actually build true customer insights, and true customer journeys can be mapped in a way where there's no gaps in data. You can actually measure that whole journey as a marketer or a campaign planner, or really any persona in an ecosystem, in an enterprise company today. So just to recap, LiveRamp Safe Haven, what it does is it enables global companies to extract maximum value from their data, and as well as data from their partners. So if we go back to the example I gave earlier with a retailer, the companies in the network could be the various brands that sell in the store. Only jointly with those partners do they have all the customer data that actually passes through the system. We want to do all this in a privacy-centric way, based on governance and permissions. So in other words, we want privacy-centric data collaboration. A kind of prerequisite to do this is that you have a neutral and secure environment where you can actually enable this data collaboration. And so Safe Haven provides this clean room experience. We also want to enable modeling and analytics as a way for our data scientist users to both bring all those disparate data sources together and actually create this unified view of the customer. So if we take a step back, when we go back to this concept of data collaboration that I mentioned, what does it actually mean for us in LiveRamp Safe Haven? Well, as a company, I have a lot of other companies in my partner network, as I mentioned. And so you want to actually bring all that data together in a compliant way and collaborate on that data to form what we call true customer 360 view. And so in this diagram here on the left, I'm basically showing that I have, as a company, I have the data that I own. So that's our first party data, or in here it says your data. And then you have the data that your partners have as well. And so if you want to collaborate on that, what we at LiveRamp enable is that we enable you first to speak on a common language, which is to say we provide you with something called an identity link, which is essentially person-based identifier to index all this data in a very consistent manner. So the moment customer data hits our systems, it's pseudonymized and indexed in this canonical LiveRamp identifier. And so once that happens, we provide a secure environment for the company as well as partners to collaborate on that data. And the way the collaboration actually happens is through permissioning unique data sets to each other. So one company may have data about a loyalty program, another company may have data about transactions, and you want to actually combine those to actually fill in the gaps in how the customer has gone from, say, buying the first good in a store to signing up on a loyalty program to going online, making a transaction, and actually then further making more purchases down the line. And so once the data comes into these environments, we want to enable data scientist users especially to leverage things like ETL tools and other analysis tools to unify all this newly permissioned data you have. So it's not just enough that you permission the data and make it available to users, but you also need to ensure that you have the right tools to integrate, to wrangle, to transform, to analyze, to build models. And I think you start to hear some of the things that Chai mentioned earlier, right? These are the kind of key concepts when we think about the different personas and how they use data. One thing I'll also mention is in this diagram on the left, we have essentially a view which shows what we call primary tenant and partner tenant. This is essentially to say, the data that we hold for companies is actually physically separated. And we'll talk a little bit about how that plays into our data operations story. So before I jump into CDAP and how we're using it, I think it's important to remember the data science value chain, right? This is like a value chain that a lot of us are quite familiar with in the data ecosystem, right? For most data scientists, data engineers as well, it basically means you have to ingest data, perform hygiene on it, apply custom transformations, and do a variety of things before you can actually derive value. And so in the case of Safe Haven, that's actually quite similar as well. On the right here, we have essentially a scenario where we have data coming from multiple sources, both batch CRM data, which may be sitting in a customer data warehouse, and real-time data like event-level data coming from, say, our website. And so we first, as I mentioned, want to anonymize that data, bring it into an analytics environment, provide modeling tools for data scientists to use. And so, at first glance, this may seem like the normal data value chain, but I want to highlight kind of three things here that hopefully will come up later as well as we talk about CDAP, which is we want to apply custom transformations. We also want to use pre-built ETL and recipes. And finally, we want to actually publish and permission these insights as reports. So when we saw all of that earlier last year, we realized that there was a need to really democratize access to these basic concepts in the data science value chain. That is, ingesting data, doing hygiene, but also some of the more LiveRamp specific concepts like performing, say, pseudonymization of the data, or interacting with other LiveRamp API, or actually doing permission-based collaboration of your ETL workflows. So that led us to realize, we have a set of requirements here for a true data ops platform. And basically, we need a self-service low-code interface. We need support for numerous data sources, basic data hygiene, transformation, and kind of storage locations both inside and outside of LiveRamp. We also, kind of one of the key things as an engineer I saw was we needed extensibility to integrate LiveRamp specific operations. It's great that a product ships with 200 out of the box operations, but it's even more fantastic when you can add your own utility on top. We need to permission these operations and data sets between organizations. So that goes back to our idea that in Safe Haven, one of the key value propositions is providing secure data collaboration. So if we want to do that, we need a way, not just to permission data sets, but also to permission the actual operations that you do on those data sets. And when you do that, a data science persona can actually, kind of 10x the impact they can have within the organization. And then finally, we want it to be, agnostic to cloud infrastructure and support multiple runtimes so that we're building for the future. So with that, we, basically, we went on this journey of discovery of ETL and the integration tools, and we came to CDAP, and we have since then kind of adopted CDAP across our stack. We have several teams using it today. We have a couple of teams who are more interested. So I would say we're still early days in our journey, but we've already realized that we can get so much value from this platform. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper in how we actually use the platform at LiveRamp today, hopefully mapping some of the CDAP concepts to LiveRamp concepts, and at the end of the day, the real customer problem we have of how do you collaborate effectively on disparate data sets. So at LiveRamp, we've gone the way of leveraging CDAP's split control and data plane concept, in that we are trying to aim to have a single control plane, which is CDAP instance deployed, essentially allowing our data science teams, data engineering teams to access a single instance, but actually be able to run their workloads in different GCP projects or different essentially siloed areas. That is, we want to bring the ETL to the data, but not actually move the data itself. And this is where CDAP's concept of namespaces and compute profiles comes in handy, because you can essentially say, you map different namespaces to teams, and then you have different compute profiles that actually determine on which customer environment you're operating on. That can be, in GCP, it could be in a different cloud environment, but that separation gives us a lot of flexibility. I also want to add that, Sri mentioned that with CDAP, there's been evolution of how and where you can run it. And so at LiveRamp, we've kind of been early adopters of running CDAP on Kubernetes. So we run the complete control plane on Kubernetes to host all the primary services in the user interface. So as an engineering team, we leverage the CDAP operator to actually make this happen. This really helps us manage actually deploying the CDAP instance itself. And then we also leverage other GCP managed services for things like storage. So we use Cloud SQL for configuration, Google Cloud Storage for file storage, and finally also went with Elasticsearch for graphing and metadata and lineage. So that's just a little quick quick view into how we actually run the platform at LiveRamp. I think this is interesting because over time it will probably evolve. One thing we're always kind of keeping our eye on is using CDAP versus Data Fusion. Our goal, over the long run, is to use as much Data Fusion as possible, take the burden off of us on managing that infrastructure. So going back to a key problem that we had of data collaboration, one of the key things that we want to enable is that when a data scientist works in Safe Haven, whether it's within LiveRamp or a data scientist at a customer in a customer enterprise, they want to be able to actually develop some of their ETL reports or models once, and then be able to distribute them to other teams so that they can take advantage of it too. And that is nothing but collaboration, right? You're saying that I will go through the process of creating a model and generalize it so that it's now relevant to more individuals within and outside of my organization. So this is where we started to realize that there was a lot of synergy with the CDAP Hub concept, or the internal marketplace. So we host this CDAP Hub as an internal marketplace within LiveRamp today. We don't yet expose it externally to our customers, but the idea is we're proofing this concept internally to say that as a data engineer, as a data scientist, I can build a pipeline, template that pipeline, and then actually publish it to the internal marketplace, and then let other teams take advantage of that. So on the diagram on the right, what I'm showing is that we have several, working kind of bottom up. We have several data engineering and data science teams that build out pipelines and plugins. They, through the normal SDLC and CI/CD process, they actually go through the process of getting a pipeline or plugin built, packaging it, publishing it to the internal artifact marketplace, which for us really is just, at the end of the day, it's a Google storage bucket. And that was kind of the beauty of setting this up, is that the CDAP Hub was so extensible in that it just provided a contract on how these things had to be maintained, but we can actually implement how that's actually stored internally. And that's a decision up to us. And so once it's on the marketplace, any team, any user that logs into CDAP internally can then decide, which pipeline or plugin to download into their namespace to use. End of the day, that pipeline or plugin is nothing but a recipe, as we call it, that indicates how to get data, process it, and at the end of the day, turn it into an aggregate form that actually produces some value. And then when we talk about collaboration, you need to be able to govern collaboration, right? Collaboration is driven off permissions, but you're enabling teams to actually share their artifacts, which today for us is all internal, but tomorrow if it is external, you want to actually have a much stronger audit or way to basically look at who's sharing what across your system. So just as customers permission data within Safe Haven, we also want to enable data scientists to permission these pre-built ETL recipes. And so this is another place where CDAP's extensibility came in handy, because CDAP at its core allows you to define your own authenticators for authentication, that is to ensure limited access to the platform, but then also authorization clients, or I should call them extensions, to actually determine on the platform who has access to what asset and what operation within the platform. So the place we're going is that we want to enable consistent permissions across the system, but also be able to determine who has addressability to what operations and artifacts within CDAP. And so as we go, the vision is that we can actually control which data scientist, which data engineer, which users in the platform have access to which artifacts in our marketplace. And that's, again, goes back to this idea that the more granular that your collaboration can be, the more likely that people will actually collaborate. So just to wrap up, I think a little quick thing on where we are going with CDAP internally at LiveRamp. We recognize that there's still a lot of work here to do. Driving adoption of a platform like this is always challenging. But CDAP has given us so much value in terms of getting, reducing time to value for our data science, data engineering teams. And so as we scale, there's a couple of key things in our mind that I just want to throw out there. Hopefully we'll talk about them in a future meetup. That is, when you start doing data collaboration, a couple of things become pretty complex. Data lineage, for example, is already a complex concept, but in the world of data collaboration, where you have ETL operations and data happening in different siloed environments, you need to actually bring all that metadata together. So we're working on a proof of concept to actually integrate CDAP's metadata system with our own data catalog internally. And the only reason we can do that is because CDAP is inherently very extensible and allows you to actually use its microservices to access its metadata. Furthermore, we want to expand on the marketplace concept to allow data scientists to share recipes between organizations. That drives home the point of true democratization and access to these ETL operations. And then finally, we continue to operate in a world of complete data separation. So as we continue to have physically separate customer data environments, we need to continue to think about all of these data science operations that we do in a remote manner. And so CDAP, again, is set up really well for us because it inherently has this concept of remote execution and supporting different clouds and infrastructures. So yeah, that kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about. I'm, again, super excited to be on this journey with Chai, Sri, and the rest of the CDAP team. And so, yeah, I hope to be here again soon.